Guys, I was just talking with Max Kellerman, and there's few people I'd rather talk fighting with than Max Kellerman, particularly when it comes to boxing. I believe he is the best. He's getting over at MMA. He's starting this show up, so I've been going on regularly, helping him out with some of these topics. But one thing that he brought to my attention was Sandhagen using the word gross when he was talking about Dillashaw's use of performance enhancers. Stay on that word, because that's a very fair word for Sandhagen. Sandhagen and a guy within the division, this is coming to you from a guy who's used that stuff. But the boys who aren't using it, for them to be disgusted by somebody else, they're not wrong. It was an interesting word by Sandhagen, and let me tell you where that's coming from. There's very few reasons not to do it. You've got the ethical reasons. You have some disciplinary, you have some punishment. Great. On the other side of the coin, in many ways, cheaters succeed. This has been ongoing. This isn't Chael's opinion. This has been ongoing in the sport, and there's been things that are adapting where the punishments get more serious. And now there's even a 3-strike rule. 3 strikes for absolutely any reason at all. You can never get a license again, right? I mean, they're getting more severe. But I can remember when John Jones went through this. John Jones does his suspension. He comes back into a multi-million-dollar fight at the top of the bill against Gustafsson. And a lot of people were pushing back and saying, man, that's not right. This guy cheated the sport. He should not get to come back against the number one contender. He should not get to come back in a main event. Now, that's a tough one if you're trying to be a hall monitor on that. And the other side of the coin is Gus wanted to fight John, and Gus did nothing wrong. So if while you trying to be the hall monitor, by keeping John out of a main event, you're now stopping Gus from a main event. You're now stopping Gus, who did nothing wrong, from having the match that he wants in a placement on the card, which is top of the bill, that he deserves. It's one of these things. But it also lends to what Sandhagen's talking about when Sandhagen says this is gross, because that's a unique word. You don't hear that word used a lot. I remember when I was going through my stuff, Brendan Schaub. Brendan's a friend of mine. He was saying this as nicely as he could, right? He was like trying to protect me while answering this question. And Brendan said, look, I've never used any of that stuff. And here you have a guy like Chael who did use it. He comes back, and now he's going to go coach the Ultimate Fighter, right? That's a reward. How can you reward guys who are on the wrong side of the tracks when the rest of us who did everything right? You see Brendan's point, which is spot on. But you also see where Sandhagen's going, well, this is gross, right? This isn't right. We have an integrity. We have a code. There's very few rules. We all need to adhere to the ones that there are. And what might surprise Sandhagen is, do you want to know who agrees with him that that behavior was gross? Do you want to know who agrees with him that that behavior was wrong? Do you want to know who agrees with him that disciplinary action should be taken of people who do? Dillashaw. Dillashaw is ashamed of it. Dillashaw doesn't even know, like when you speak to TJ, he can't even recall how he went down that road or that line of thinking. And I will tell you, if that sounds like a cop-out, if you ever hear TJ say that and you think that that's a cop-out, it's real. You get caught up in those spots. It's generally everybody has the same reasoning, which is it was a culture. You hear the excuse of everyone was doing it, which isn't true, but you hear that excuse a lot. But a lot of times you'll get an athlete where a coach grabs them. Coach that they trust grabs them, pulls them aside, and says, here's what you need to get to the next level. I have an appointment set up. I want you to go and talk with this doctor, right? And then there's just this trust, and all of a sudden you look back and 5 months have gone by and you're sticking a needle, and this is just part of your process. The same way that you're going to practice every day at 3. Okay, well, every 4 days I got to take a shot. I got to take 0.2 of this, and I got to make sure I have my syringes. It becomes normal. It becomes the new normal. So TJ also thinks that's gross. I'm with TJ and I'm with Sandhagen. It is. It's wrong, but this is how these things happen. And what do you do with a guy? You bring TJ back from suspension. He goes right to the top of the bill in what I think is the number one contenders fight. That hasn't been stated. I would predict for you prior to bell time that will be stated. It seems quite obvious that this is a number one contenders fight. Possibly no fight is booked right now that is more obvious would be the number one contenders fight. which means TJ with a win in a main event spot goes right back to another main event spot, except this time it's for the title, which comes to the word gross. It's to the point that Brendan was making about me years ago and go, well, look, he did these things, but he's moving on, right? I mean, it's one of those tough spots. How do you fully police it? And what are the punishments that you're using as deterrents to get into it? I think everything's in a much better spot. And as I sit back and I watch guys, right? And I don't need a drug test for anybody. I just need an eye test. I'll be able to tell you who's using, and I'll be able more specifically to tell you what they're using. But when I'm watching some of these guys now that have found a way around the system, and it took a period of time. It took a period of time where everybody was on needles, and now guys have loosened up, and they're pretty confident that they can beat the system. But you can still tie those guys, boom, here. Forget about the people that I'm telling you are using and Chael's eye test, and the system isn't perfect. Forget about it. But let's take the ones that I'm not doing that. Let's take the ones that have come in hot. Let's take the ones who are identified, flagged, cop to the whole thing, serve suspension. You can take that group, the last 10 people, and you can then identify a commonality with them. I mean, I can remember a time, and I'm going back to 2014, but there was a period of time where a specific group of guys, largely from the same gym, all were getting hit one after the next. And there was a strength and conditioning coach that would come onto the stage when they would weigh in who was yoked out of his mind. And the tie-in was him. I can see this from my couch in Westland, Oregon. These guys are from all over the world. I can watch the weigh-in and go, him, there's your supplier. You're punishing all of these guys, rightfully so. That's what the rules say. But he's still on the stage, and everybody knows that has two eyes. It's him. If you go back and take the last 10 people, the ones that were hot, not Chael speaking out of school, boom, they were hot. Go do a simple equation and see how many of them are managed by the same guy. Because this is going on in the sport right now, but it always happens in the same waves. You can always take this, boom, and pin it on one guy. Go do an interesting study for yourself. There's one group dirtier than the rest of them, and they all plug back to the same guy. But he's still out there managing guys. And everybody knows it. It's not just Chael at home knows it. USADA knows it. Everybody knows it. These are pretty simple, basic deductions. What commonality do these cheaters have in common? Boom, him. But he's still there. And he's still collecting his 10%. And nobody's saying anything. And he's got the press releases ready. And as soon as this guy gets hit, he brings the new guy in and he's playing this game. He's playing this game with these young athletes' lives who trust him. And why it's always the easy default to put it on the athlete and go, well, you're responsible for anything that goes into your system. That is just that. It's a cop-out. I can remember the day in Nevada when one of the commissioners who was judging Nick Diaz for marijuana use was a pot seller. He was an open drug dealer, openly. The laws had changed in Nevada. He had a storefront. It was all above board. I don't suggest for you that it wasn't, but could you imagine the irony? What if Nick, who is getting sentenced, bought his drugs from that guy who's about to punish Nick for taking the... Do you see the problem? And so when you cop out in these positions of authority and ultimately put it back to the athlete, which is the lowest possible common denominator, when you put it on the athlete as a cop out that they're responsible for anything that goes into your system, it sure does insulate and protect you, but there's generally more to the story. And when you have these commonalities and you have this information and you understand that there are some adults in the room that are grabbing these young athletes when they were minors, 15 and 17, and they're minors, and then they become adults and they make it to the pros, but they still look up to this authority figure who's pumping them full of drugs. And he's playing a game of, well, you're the one that takes it on the chin. And while you sit out for 2 years, I got another drug user coming in that I'm willing to throw in the circle to keep that 20% coming in. It's one of these really weird things. And I sit back and go, all these 10 guys, 7 of the 10 all tie into him, but he's still here. And I remember back in 2014 when all the guys were getting hit, right? They were all, this strength and conditioning coach is still coming across the stage. It's an interesting thing. What is Chael's point? Don't know that I have one. But do I have a message? Sure I do. I believe you just heard it.